Hello, as promised, I'm back. We're in Asia, in Singapore, and we're going to get straight into it with our first speaker. Somebody I've had the privilege to know for a long time. I've respected him from afar for even longer. We've had a chat on our podcast in the past, and we spoke probably about 5 or 6 years ago about how we could do something in Singapore, and who knew the first time would be during a pandemic virtually, with me being awake at 3:10 in the morning UK time. But I'm delighted to welcome our first speaker in Asia, Garrad. Lewis is passionate about driving performance and improvement in organizations through people-focused solutions. He's worked across a lot of awesome businesses such as Shell, Rolls-Royce, Skype, National Grid, to name but a few. Chartered by the British Psychological Society as an occupational psychologist, he graduated from the University of Nottingham in the UK with an MSc in occupational psychology and a first-class honours in psychology and cognitive neuroscience. If you're wondering what the second one is about, it basically means study your brain, and he's a very, very clever man or human being. So without further ado, I'm going to try and bring in Lewis. Lewis, welcome.
Hello, hi. Hello, Asia. I hope you can hear me and see me okay.
Yes, we can. And you've had a haircut since I last saw you, I think.
Listen, I'm feeling very fresh, I'll be honest. It's nice to be able to join a session like this in the morning. A little haircut, maybe even a shave, my friend. So how is it at 3 a.m. there? I mean, it's sterling work by you, Matt, to get up so early.
Well, I thought I would have some company. Stefan basically is the legend. He's fallen unwell, so we're sending him our best. It's lonely. I'm trying to be quiet so my wife doesn't wake up very angry with me tomorrow morning without that much sleep. But like I say, I've been saying for about 9 hours now, this is a product of our times, basically. And some idiot had a really crazy idea to do a 24-hour event. And here we are.
Yeah, and Matt, I mean, best wishes to Stefan, and hope he's staying well. I think it's an amazing testament, like you say, to our time that we can organize something like this. And I think the topic is wonderful. I'm also, if you hear any background noise, I have a small baby. Last time you and I talked, I think he was on the way.
Yes.
And he's running around outside. So if you're banging on the door, my 15-month-old is desperate to see me. So,
well, let's hope he makes an appearance. Absolutely. So I'm gonna exit stage left and leave you to it, and I will be back later.
Great, and for some questions, I hope. Yes.
Absolutely.
So look, it's a great pleasure to be here. Let's pop up the slides and just sort of say, look. I called this working with a wow, because, when I asked myself, what does it feel like to be inspired? I felt like, well, it's that experience of like, wow, that was amazing. So, I'm going to share some ideas here about how I think organizations achieve that. If you want to connect with me, there's a QR code here. If you're used to sort of scanning these things, I am, wandering around here in Singapore. I hope you can sort of link up with me and get some of my ideas. So, I asked myself, well, what is it that inspires people? What do I think really enables that sense of wow and inspiration, particularly at work? And when I was sort of looking at it, I stepped back and said, well, actually, it's not just about work, it's about life. And the thing that I noticed that many people who are inspired, when they describe what that feeling looks like, they often talk a lot about how meaningful whatever they're doing is. When someone has that sense of inspiration, it's very often coming because they feel that what they're doing is incredibly meaningful. People find meaning inspirational. That real strong sense that, what I'm doing carries a heavy weight. And this is really different from some of the sort of the perhaps legacy concepts we've been working with like, for example, engagement or even happiness. Many people have very meaningful lives that they sort of find as inspiring. but find those situations very challenging, as in meaning can come in all sorts of different forms, and it doesn't always generate happiness. But I think that when somebody is working really hard and showing a lot of resilience, at the heart of that, very often you find meaning. So I've done a lot of reading and research on this. Luckily, psychologists have been studying this topic for decades, frankly. You know, we're not the first ones to stumble across this. And one of my favorite books is by a professor, his name is Roy Baumeister, and he wrote an incredible book called The Meanings of Life, plural meanings. And early in that book, he talks a lot about, well, what is meaning? You know, you can't build something, you can't design for something unless you really understand what it is. And in that text, he basically says, look, if we really get to the core of what meaning is about connection. Meanings connect things. And if you think about human beings, you know, very often when we talk about what we find meaningful, we're thinking of that in the construct of what am I connected to? So, you know, very often meaning is experienced through other people. So I am connected to others. To the future, one of the reasons why people feel that the personal learning, growth, or innovation experimentation is very exciting and meaningful is it's because it connects that person to some sort of new and exciting future. Me to the past, you know, where have I come from? What is my history? Meaning connects me to my journey. And of course, one of my favorites is me to myself. In the modern age, you know, one of the things that you'll hear people say is like, well, you know, I need to find myself. And this is sort of, it doesn't really make any sense if you think about it, you know, objectively. But what someone is saying when they say, I want to find myself, is that I want to find meaning in my life. I want to find meaning through self. And if you've been on Instagram or TikTok, you realize that there are many, many people in the world who are finding ways to express themselves in a way that perhaps they find meaningful. You get it. But the core concept here that I want everyone to take away is that meaning is inspiring and meaning is really about connection. So the next question you might ask is, well, does it matter? What is the evidence that, you know, this search for meaning is inspiring and does good things for people? A few years ago, my colleague Tomas Chamara-Pemusic and I wrote a short article for the Harvard Business Review, looking at the research here, and you know, a few bullet points on the left if you want to use the QR code to connect to it. Basically, the research shows that people who experience meaningful work report better health, well-being. They find it easier to work in teams. They're more engaged. One of the things that I thought was very important was actually they tend to view setbacks and mistakes as learning opportunities rather than failures. They tend to be more resilient. And that's also why I think in the modern era, it's incredibly important to see meaning as a driver of resilience. But of course, businesses then that carry a lot of meaning are very clear about what they're for, tend to have better financial performance. So what does it look like to experience meaning? 4 things, you know, again, you can read these in Roy's book, but I think, you know, just translating those for us into work. I have a strong sense of purpose. Now, we often conflate meaning and purpose, you know, use them interchangeably. They're not the same thing. Purpose is about a strong sense of goals. You know, I know where I'm headed. Purpose is about direction. And so purpose is about goals. And it's different from value. What I'm doing is good, and other people think it is good. So this is an interesting one because what people value or see as good changes over time. So what if we look 20 years ago and ask, well, what was good, what was right in the world? You know, you might get a different answer to what you would say today. You know, for example, today we think much more about people working on topics related to sustainability. More generally, people, if you did work in that area, you would see, wow, that's a meaningful job because it's doing something that we see as very important, that is good and valuable for the world around you. The third is that I could affect the world around me and make an impact. Efficacy is one of the key things that help people establish a strong sense of meaning. I actually have influence on the world around me. And if you think about this, if you disconnect people from the world, if they can't influence the world around them, they often feel a strong sense of disconnection. You know, again, if you think of meaning as connection, that you experience that connection often through change, making an impact. And then last, I'm a valuable and important person, self-worth. You know, you perhaps in some case, this is very strongly tied to, let's say, value. What I'm doing is good, so I am an important and valuable person, but it doesn't have to be. You know, there is a sense that some people can be doing, you know, work that is very good, important, making a lot of change, but they don't really understand or feel confident in themselves. And actually, people have a real strong need to feel that they are a valuable and important person. It's deeply biologically rooted. So that makes sense. And, you know, as I said, you know, this is well-established research. In fact, you know, a lot of these ideas are from the early 90s. And, you know, I love that in the 80s, we had a real boom in this area. Because that was really when we were starting to see this kind of meaning through self really coming into the mainstream. You know, the famous Whitney Houston song, "The Greatest Love of All," is actually about her love for herself. So, you know, there's this sort of amazing movement that we've kind of seen sort of culminate in social media, where a lot of people find meaning through, you know, this sense that, you know, I am a good, valuable, important person. So this is not new. And for many people, it's like, I get this, it makes sense. When people experience these things, they tend to work harder and be more energized. So how did that work out? In spite of the fact that we know all of this, if you jump onto Google, type "my job is," and see what the autocorrect will give you, people are off, what you'll see is often responses that look like this: boring, meaningless, making me sick and depressed. It's an indictment of our ability to create work that people find meaningful. And it's important to recognize you know, what creates the absence of meaning is that sense of disconnection. You know, meaning comes in hierarchies. You know, so you know, this concept is connected to a more important one, which is connected to a more important one, which is connected to a more important one. So the most meaningful thing is the thing at the top of the hierarchy, right? And so again, it's that sense of connection. How am I connected to something bigger and important than perhaps the day-to-day task that I'm doing? That, you know, often people lose sight of. You know, it's too far away, too disconnected. So connection is such an important concept. So how do we get there? And why, with all this wonderful science, innovation, and technology, have we not made this better? And I love this image because, you know, all the paper flying out of the computer, I think is, if you looked at your inbox and imagined that was actually documents piled up on your desk, you'd start to realize the full weight of what many people are asked to do. If you're on Office 365, Microsoft, for me at least, sends me emails on a weekly, you know, every so often, to tell me how many emails I've read and, you know, how many interactions I'm having with other people. And you really get a strong sense that perhaps this might be more information than a human being can actually manage. And because it's overwhelming, again, it's very difficult sometimes to see how these tasks and activities are connected to something bigger and more important, that inspiration that people are looking for. And so, you know, the people like Cal Newport, he's a computer scientist, have started to say, this is why we need time to disconnect, to start to think about what does it mean to do deep work, to really think about what you're doing, to have space to focus on things that are important. So, you know, if you're going to have a meaningful experience, sometimes you actually need to create room in your day for it. So how do we do this? You know, how can we create more meaningful experiences for people? So you have to start with understanding what experiences are. And at Mercer, we've done a lot of work about this. And for us, it's really the intersection of three things. The first is the employee themselves. Who are they? What are their expectations? As I said, you know, everybody is different. What persona are you designing the experience for is a really important component of understanding what effective and meaningful experiences look like. Second, what is the environment that we're providing? And that's a huge term, very broad topic, but it's everything from culture, and culture is all about particularly social interactions. You know, we often say that in culture, interaction is where the action is. So it's all about, all of those touch points, those interactions that people experience, but not just with other people, also with the physical space they use and the technology they use. What does that feel like? And then last are events. Experiences often happen in journeys. They're not static, they're not one time. Actually, someone moves through a sequence of events, and that sequence of events becomes an experience. So what are the meaningful events that really influence how that person feels about that experience? And these events can be life events, career events, organization events, but they all these different peaks and troughs really cause somebody to shift emotionally, and that really matters. So that's the first thing, understand what experiences are. The second thing is to say, well, so what sort of experiences do people want? I mean, that's an important question. And, for us, again, we have this nice 4 E's model, a lot of E's going on there: employee, environment, and event. And here we have another 4 E's, which you can see is divided into nice 2x2. Consultants love that. The kind of dimensions here are my work and my life, my goals and my well-being. And then within that, there are these different sorts of experiences that people can have that you can design for. So efficient experiences are ones that move you towards your goal quickly, frictionless. And very often people find that sense of progress, I'm moving forward to where I want to be, actually quite pleasing, quite meaningful. But the other thing that it does is it removes things that feel meaningless in the environment, where it's like, well, what's this for? It doesn't seem to have any purpose. Second, enriching. It adds value to me. This experience helps me grow and experience a strong sense of efficacy. Embracing. I feel like I belong here. We are social beings. We want to feel connected to others. This deeply biologically rooted, that feeling disconnected from your community, you experience that as a threat. So, and the opposite is true. When you feel connected to your community, you feel rewarded. So how do I feel that sense of belonging, like I fit in? And then this sense that other people understand me, and that they have a strong sense of empathy for the experience I'm having. So I'm supported and cared for. Those experiences can be really wow. So if you think about this, at the beginning I said meaning is important, and if the objective is to create experiences that make that wow come to life, all of these things are in play. Wow, that was easy. Frictionless. Wow, that really made me feel like I've developed myself, or I made an impact. Wow, I really feel like I belong here. And wow, you really understood me. These things are really important experiences. So how do we get there? What actions can we take? 4 things I'd like to offer. So the first is we need to take this design mentality. It's a bit of a buzzword now, design everything, but we have to apply that to work. How are we designing work? And the reason we have to do that is because a lot of work is designed in a way, as we saw earlier, that demotivates people. So a study we did here with about 1,000 people over the first year of joining an organization showed us that people start very motivated. More than 9 out of 10 people say, yeah, I'm very energized and motivated. And you've lost a quarter of them by the end of the first year. So they brought energy and inspiration with them, and they lost it within the first year. It's managed out of them. And when you sort of do the research, what you realize is things like poor job design. The job isn't designed to be meaningful and engaging. And that's often because managers design jobs and they receive very little training to be able to actually build jobs that people will find engaging. Unhelpful feedback. Listen, a lot of feedback is delivered with the person who is giving the feedback's emotional energy in mind. What I mean by that is that good feedback helps develop the self-awareness and capability of the recipient. But often a lot of feedback is given as a kind of emotional catharsis to kind of deliver a message that makes the person who's giving the feedback feel better. So the way that we get around this is we start to say, look, if you need to offer a point of view to someone, couch it in terms of advice. What advice are you giving them that will help that person improve? Which softens the evaluative element of the feedback. And then last, the confusion between hindrances and challenges. Hindrances are barriers to progress. They drain energy and they're demotivating. Challenges are exciting. They generate energy. A difficult project, a time pressure, something that needs to be done quickly. Hindrances are often experienced as bureaucracy or politics. And organizations very often don't see the difference between these two things. You need to design a job to be challenging and try to remove barriers to progress to the extent possible. So that's jobs. Second, teams. We tend to think if we just put a group of people together who are nice to each other, that the team will function effectively. And actually the research says that this isn't what happens. What we need to do is be very structured in the sort of environment that we want to build. We have to have an objective for the team in mind in terms of its environment and culture, its norms. And we know that highly diverse, psychologically safe teams tend to deliver better outcomes. They're more creative, innovative, and productive. So this research here I thought was really useful to kind of say, well, what does it feel like to work in that sort of diverse and safe team? People describe it as, curious, encouraging, experimental, but not soft. Forceful is a word that they would use. People are comfortable providing their opinion and challenging other people, but in a supportive way. And many of us still are struggling to build environments that look like that. But there are examples. Google, for this is an old example, but I think was useful to kind of say, look, they had very specific principles they wanted to see when they were building teams that they knew predicted success. And many of these things are backed up by decades of social science. Third, redesign your meetings. Meetings are a microcosm of your culture. The team at DBS, I think, did a wonderful job. This came from a presentation that they did maybe a year or two ago now, looking at the experience of meetings in their organization. There was their employee experience team that did this, and what they recognized is that meetings are where should be decision-making events. But very often people join a meeting and sort of sit and listen to the most important person and then leave, and they don't contribute perhaps as much as they would like. And I think all of us have had these experiences. So they tried to implement specific tactics and tools to improve the quality of the meeting, because this is where a lot of social exchange and interaction happens. So just an example, they had this concept called Meeting Mojo. Mojo stands for Meeting Organizer, Joyful Observer. The organizer controls the agenda, but the joyful observer controls the culture in the meeting. This is the person who gives feedback on the quality of the meeting and sort of lets the organizer know whether or not it's meet its objectives. Last, make it part of what leaders do. Back to the article I mentioned earlier. How do you make work more meaningful for your team? Leaders play an important role. In that article, we identified 4 characteristics of leaders that help generate meaningful work. That they're competent, they're curious, they are energetic and ambitious, but also they know how to trust people. To build a team that's effective and and to not micromanage. And I think it's important to step back and ask, what kind of leaders get ahead in our organizations? Are they people with strong sense of integrity, competence, charisma, which means they're enjoyable to follow, effective, they get the outcomes that we're looking for? Or do we use perhaps the more insidious signals to select our leaders? Unfortunately, in the modern era, one of the best ways to cause people to think that you're competent is to fake it. And, I'm sure many of us have seen examples of people who have gotten ahead by, telling everybody that perhaps they are better than they actually are, and ended up in positions that perhaps they are not fully competent to actually enact. So leaders are important, and the way that we choose them really matters. Matt, this is my last slide but one. So what am I saying? Look, meaning matters. It matters because it's a source of important inspiration in life. And if we want people to experience meaning, then we have to design for it. We have to understand that we know what experiences are and what kinds of experiences work. And then we need to put those concepts into real actions in jobs, in teams and the way that we train and develop leaders. If we want to create more inspirational and meaningful work, then we need to think about it from the employee's perspective. How does that person experience the most meaningful work that we can possibly create for them? If you like these ideas, then I'm all over social media. Please do connect with me. And at Mercer, we're doing a lot of work on job redesign, on employee experience, on mental health and well-being. And if you're interested in these, please ping us a note. We would love to share some ideas with you. So with that, Matt, I hope you were able to follow along. It was great to be able to share some ideas. I crashed through it.
Yeah. You did, and there was a lot there. Stuff I hadn't considered, especially considering where our inspiring workplace is. The whole concept of meaning. It is fascinating. I'm just trying to make sense of it. Both, I think my frontal cortex starts to soak up all the information. Is that
the prefrontal cortex is the bit that makes you the human being that you are, my friend. You've got all of the. But you see, what's interesting about this, Matt, is that a lot of the things that we're tapping into here are neurologically, and it's very interesting to see that psychology now. I was chatting to a friend of mine who's a psychology professor. He was saying you can't get a paper published on personality, for example, anymore without showing the evolutionary or neurological roots of the thing that you're interested in studying, the behavior. And but a lot of those behaviors are from ancient parts of the brain, like very simple, particularly emotions that drive a lot of behavior are quite animalistic. They're quite ancient. And if you think about what I was just saying there, the behaviors that you see in people, particularly around community, wanting to be with others, but also around status and self-worth, I want to be important. Both of those things you can imagine, are important for survival.
Yeah.
Like if you're in a community and you're an important person in that community, you're much more likely to procreate and survive and, pass on your genes.
I was watching a documentary called Unfit that I won't say who it was about, but it was talking about the evolution of the tribes, of the chimpanzee tribes, and which tribes survived throughout evolution, and that's how you get to those leaders that get there. So the narcissism piece, but I am trying to bring it all together. Really, it's an absolutely great presentation. Which we'd love to explore more. Really, if you're able to, maybe we could follow it up with a story on our blog section. But I think there's just a number of takeaways for me that 9 out of 10 people obviously begin motivated, and after a year, you've lost a quarter of them. That the different to create a more meaningful experience, you've got to focus on the employee, the environment, and events. And I think that's the employee, environment, and events. So I think that's another piece that people forget, that as you say, you're on a journey and you have life experiences both inside of work and outside of work, and people have to focus on that. But there was a lot there that I would actually love to revisit. Actually,
I mean, yeah, exactly. We can follow up on it, but I mean, I would say
about redesigning work.
I mean, I like the idea that the design tools that we've been talking about, we tend to, a lot of the design tools are for products, which is great. I mean, that's how, that's where they should be evolving from. And like taking those concepts and starting to say, well, what can we learn about the good design of work and teams, and sort of applying those ideas. I think that's really what we're doing with employee experience type work. We're trying to say, well, what are good design principles? And how do we embed them in what we do? But just conceptually, the idea of being intentional and actually acting on something, and starting to say, well, how do we, not just what do we want it to do, like what do we want the job to do, for example, but how do we want it to feel, is, you start to step back and say, well, okay, well, why? And, how does that relate, and all these things. But, I really get the strong sense that, a lot of organizations these days are interested in, well, the thing that gets people to build resilience, for example, not just in the business model, but also in people, requires somebody to be able to approach work with a different mindset. And the people who seem to achieve that are the ones who have that strong sense of meaning. So yeah, then understanding what meaning is, and like I said, it's really about connection to other people, to yourself, to the future, to the past. Is an interest. It's why stories work, because stories carry a lot of meaning, because stories are journeys that connect things. It's you start to sort of see these concepts and philosophically in a much broader way.
So when we talk about redesigning meetings, in the hybrid world we're living in right now, and obviously it's here to stay. How are people going to go about doing that? Because obviously we've all jumped onto Zoom and Teams and whatever you want to call it. And there's the story of Bezos and Amazon years ago. You had to walk in, there was no slides, and in a meeting it was on one piece of paper, and that was a storytelling exercise, actually. It'd be interesting to know what you think about how the redesign goes on in a virtual environment as well, and if you've seen any good examples of that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think
meetings are can be such a waste of time as well. We're just sat there.
And look, yeah, it depends. There are lots of different types of meeting, right? But I think one of the things is to have a process for these things. Like one of the interesting things I've learned over the last few years is that, for example, with innovation works best when you have a process for it that everyone can contribute to. So we tend to think of innovation as kind of like a bolt of inspiration. You're like this brilliant individual sort of coming up with a brand new set of ideas. And, sure, there's a bit of that, like someone seeing a new perspective, but often that happens because of an interaction they've had with someone else. They're like, oh, I'd learned something new. And so you realize that interactions are a source of innovation. So, the process, if you're getting a group of people together to move people through generating, evaluating, and then building on ideas and how you sort of test those ideas, makes a meeting much more engaging because everybody knows the process and can contribute. And so that's, on the sort of generative side, but like a decision-making side, there might be a different process. This is how we do it. The Bezos example, the Amazon example, is they have a process for the meeting. They want you to, and the reason is that it's consume the information quietly at the beginning, read the 6-page memo, talk about it, and then make the decision. And it's, the point is that then everyone has the same information. You all can then ask questions and build off each other. And by the end of the meeting, you're going to make a decision. So it's not so much what they're, it's a 6-page memo and that's what we're going to do. It's the process of getting a group of smart people together to be able to solve an important problem, and they have a clear role in it, and he's leveling the playing field in terms of information. These things are important, but very often we just leave that to managerial competence. It's just like, well,
quick follow-up to that, because we mentioned it earlier in the day in one of our talks. Is curiosity an important part of this then? To ask and challenge, to ask why, to push back?
From a leader, yeah. Well, so like again, in the article I was referencing, the first characteristic we talk about in terms of leaders that create meaning is curious and inquisitive. And the key thing there, that he said, these people get bored very quickly, so they're constantly looking for improvement, but which it can be good. So people tend, again, to find that experimentation meaningful because two things. First, it connects you to a future. So the connection is important. It's like, okay, so a new future is coming and it's exciting and interesting. So second, because there's a, deep down, many of us have a need for a novelty and exploration. And so there's a deep biological root to that, which you'll find engaging and interesting. So yes. And third, because again, it's about self-expression and experimentation. In fact, Dan Cable's book, there's a book called Alive at Work. I didn't mention it, but he talks about 3 things. He talks about self-expression, experimentation, and purpose as ways to create exciting work environments. And if you think about self-expression, I can bring my, this is the whole self to work kind of thing, but basically saying that, I feel I can contribute, and experimentation as two roots of meaningful conversation or interaction with others. The question then is, well, how do I structure that in that we are enabling everybody to do that? So then it becomes a process anyway. But I think curiosity as a characteristic is very new age, as in industrial era working was a bit much more about doing what you were told.
Yeah, absolutely.
So whereas the modern day seems the computer does what it's told, the human being has to do something else.
Well, as I say, as always, having spoken with you or listening to you, my mind is running off in many different directions, and I'm going to have to read the book Deep Work, because I think
Newport, it's a great book. But by the end, he's talking about the deep work machine, which turns out to be a building, by the way. But if you before you read the book, listen to the Hidden Brain podcast where they interview him. They did that a year or two ago just to get a flavor. But he talks about how again, curiosity is the thing that machines are using to leverage your attention. So attention is limited. It's a limited resource. Yeah. And if your emails or message system or whatever is constantly dragging your attention away, it's just feeding enough of it's a bit like junk food for your brain.
Yeah.
Which you get the concept, right? You're just feeding it enough, but it's not very nourishing. You're not getting smarter through checking your email, basically.
No, you're not.
You're meeting the need. So it's interesting.
Like I say, there's so many avenues I really want to explore now, and that's one of them that I think we'll spend a lot more time on. So, Lewis, thank you for saying yes. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us all. And let's hope. I'm going to try and get to Australia. I would like to come via Singapore. I did have that booked for July. The BA cancelled them. So
listen, you're going to need get vaccinated, and you'll be all good.
Yeah, but look, take care. Enjoy your new young son, and I will speak to you very soon. Thank you so much.
Well done. Thanks.